The rain came in sideways off the Chesapeake, low and mean, scraping across the parking lot of Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek, like it had something to prove. It was 05:12 on a Monday morning in November, and the base looked exactly like what it was, a place where soft things came to be made hard or broken trying. Captain Mara Voss sat in a rented Chevy Malibu with the engine off. She had been sitting there for 11 minutes, not from hesitation, from habit. The habit of reading a space before entering it, of cataloging exits, angles, the geometry of a situation before committing her weight to it. She had learned this during her first deployment to Helmand Province at 25 and had refined it across 2 subsequent tours with Marine Force Recon. It was not caution, it was the opposite of caution. It was the discipline that made action possible. She was 34 years old, lean in the way that comes not from effort, but from economy. Every ounce carrying a function. Her jaw was squared, not from genetics, but from years of holding it still when voices got loud. Her eyes were dark and did not blink when someone was trying to make them. Below her left cheekbone, catching the pale wash of a distant security light, was a scar. Small, a half-inch crescent. Not from enemy fire. From a bamboo pole in a collapsed compound outside Sangan, a structure that had come down while 3 of her men were still inside it. She had rigged a rope line and pulled them out. One had a compound fracture of the femur and still made it home. The pole caught her on the way back in for the 3rd man. She had not mentioned it in her after-action report because it did not seem relevant to the mission outcome. That had been a Tuesday. Now she was here. She looked at the orders again, not to reread them. She had read them 8 times since Friday at 17:30, when they had arrived without warning, without explanation, without the courtesy of a phone call. She had them memorized by Saturday morning. She was looking at the bottom of the 2nd page, at a single line of handwriting that was not part of the official text. It was written in blue ballpoint, slightly cramped, the hand of someone who was not accustomed to writing slowly. Don't trust the brief. 4 words, no signature, no context. She had stared at those 4 words for the better part of 2 days, and she was no closer to understanding who had written them or why. She folded the orders, slid them into the inside pocket of her jacket, got out of the car. The rain hit her immediately. She did not adjust her collar or quicken her pace. She walked toward the gate security checkpoint the same way she walked everywhere, as if the ground had been chosen deliberately and the speed was a decision, not a reaction. The duty officer at the gate was 22 years old and trying not to look impressed. He checked her ID, checked his manifest, checked her face against her ID photo, which showed the same expression she was wearing right now, and waved her through without unnecessary conversation. She appreciated that. She had driven 400 miles and was already tired of people. The Cross-Branch Combat Integration Assessment had been running for 6 cycles before Mara Voss was assigned to Cycle 7. She knew this because she had requested the program documentation the same evening her orders arrived and had spent Saturday and Sunday reading all of it. CBCIA was a framework designed to evaluate whether officers from outside the Naval Special Warfare pipeline could sustain operational effectiveness in an NSW environment. The concept was straightforward. The execution, based on what she had read, so every previous candidate in the program had been either a Navy or Army officer, special operations background, most of them, 1 Air Force combat controller, no Marines. She was the first Marine ever assigned to CBCIA. She had not been asked if she wanted to be. She had a standing offer from Quantico that she had been considering for 3 weeks. A biometric intelligence coordination role, desk work mostly, but meaningful desk work, the kind that had downstream consequences she could measure. She had been close to calling them back and saying yes. Then the orders arrived. She had called Quantico and told them she needed time to think. She had not told them how much time. The brief was at 0600 in Building 117, a low concrete structure near the main training compound that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. 8 trainees were already seated when she arrived. 2 more came in behind her. She took a seat in the 2nd row, center, set her bag down, folded her hands on the table. At 0558, Master Chief Brent Calloway walked in. He was 54 years old and looked like he had been assembled from spare parts by someone who prioritized function over comfort. 6'2", maybe 230, with forearms that belonged on a man who had spent 27 years pulling himself over walls and through water and across terrain that was not designed to be crossed. His face had the quality of weathered sandstone, textured, immovable, and carrying the compressed memory of 1,000 pressures. His eyes were light gray, the color of a sky that has already decided to storm. He walked to the front of the room and set a tablet on the podium. He did not greet the room, did not make eye contact with anyone. He began speaking while still angling the tablet into position, as if the act of acknowledging the audience were a formality he had long since deprioritized. Cross-branch combat integration assessment, cycle 7. This is a 48-hour rotation over 11 days. His voice was flat and efficient, a voice that had given 1,000 briefs and expected nothing from any of them. You will be evaluated on individual performance metrics, team integration capacity, and stress response under simulated operational conditions. Passing score is 78% aggregate. Anything below 75 gets you pulled on day 9. Anything below 70 requires an immediate review board. He went through the structure of the program with the speed of a man reciting something he had memorized without having to try. Mara listened. She did not write anything down. This was the thing about Mara Voss that most people did not know, and that she did not advertise. She had what her high school history teacher had once called a sticky mind, information presented verbally, adhered to her recall with near total fidelity. She could replay a 40-minute brief like rewinding a tape. It had made her an unusually effective intelligence officer in her second tour before she transferred to recon. It made her, in situations like this one, a person who appeared to be passively listening while actually absorbing everything. She absorbed the program structure. She absorbed the evaluation criteria. She absorbed the names of the other trainees as Calloway listed assignments. And she absorbed something else. Calloway had not looked at her once. In a room of 11 people, not once, that was not an accident. Men who ran rooms like this were trained to read rooms. You did not run 27 years of NSW without developing an instinct for who was in the space with you. He knew exactly where she was sitting. He had chosen not to acknowledge it. She noted this the way she noted everything, without expression, without reaction. She took the small notebook from her breast pocket, Write in the Rain, black cover, spine worn to a pale gray from handling, and wrote nothing. She would write later, when she had more data. After the brief, the trainees moved toward the gear bay in a loose group. The rain had eased to a mist. Mara walked slightly apart from the others, not from unfriendliness, but from the simple reality that she did not yet know these men well enough to trust the geometry of moving in a cluster with them. She was almost to the gear bay door when she heard her name. Captain Voss, she turned. Senior Chief Travis Munn was walking toward her with a particular kind of energy, not aggressive, almost collegial, the social ease of a man who had spent years learning how to approach people in ways that did not trigger their defenses. He was 38, built like a competitive swimmer, with a face that arranged itself naturally into expressions of openness. He had sandy hair, going slightly gray at the temples, and the relaxed posture of someone who had never needed to try hard in a room. Travis Munn, he said, extending a hand. Senior Chief, heard you came out of recon. That's right, she said, and shook it. 3 tours. 3. He nodded as if confirming something he already knew. That's real work. Different environment than this, but real work. He paused. Anything I can clarify from the brief? Sometimes the first one runs fast. She looked at him for a moment. I'm good, thank you, Senior Chief. Something moved through his eyes, not offense, more like calibration. Of course, he smiled. Good luck out there. He walked away. She watched him for 3 seconds, the particular ease of his stride, the slight angle of his glance back over his shoulder that he perhaps thought was too casual to notice. Then she went into the gear bay. Her kit locker was number 7. She opened it, checked the contents against the equipment manifest she had been given, and found everything present except one item. The standard issue tactical load-bearing strap, not a critical piece, but required for the obstacle course rotation scheduled for 0800. Without it, she would either have to request a replacement through the supply chain, which would take time she didn't have, and create a paper trail she didn't need, or run the O course with an improvised setup that could affect her scoring. She checked the manifest twice to confirm she had not miscounted. She had not. She closed the locker, thought for a moment, then walked the length of the gear bay reading the locker numbers. She was not looking for anything specific. She was looking at everything. At locker 14, she stopped. The locker had a small strip of adhesive tape above the combination dial, and on the tape, written in black marker, was a single letter. R. It meant nothing to her yet. She moved on. The O course at Little Creek was not designed to be kind, and it wasn't. 400 meters of obstacles configured in a sequence that compounded fatigue. Low crawl through a sand pit, rope climb to a platform, monkey bars over a gravel bed, a tilted wall that required specific body mechanics to clear efficiently, and a final 200-meter sprint with a weighted pack, the full course. Standard SEAL qualification layout, modified slightly. Mara had reviewed the published version before arriving. In the gear bay, one of the other trainees mentioned offhand that the layout had been changed 2 weeks ago. Calloway had modified the sequence. The new configuration was not in any document Mara had been given. She filed this information. She found the new layout on a laminated map posted on the wall near the equipment check station. Small, easy to miss, positioned at hip height between two larger signage boards. She stood in front of it for 90 seconds, memorized it completely. When the whistle blew, she ran the new course. Not the published one, the new one. She finished in the top 4. Her time was clean. Her form was clean. She had never run this specific sequence before in her life and had used precisely the information available to her, the same information available to every other trainee in the rotation. Calloway did not acknowledge her finish time. He was already writing on his clipboard as she crossed the final marker. When the scores were posted 30 minutes later, her O-course result read, "Unfamiliar with modified protocol. Score adjustment applied." She looked at those words for 3 seconds. Then she looked at her time. Then she looked at the scores of the other trainees who had finished after her. None of them had score adjustments. She took out her notebook, turned to the first page. At the top, she had already written 3 names before arriving at Little Creek: Calloway, Munn, and a third name she had drawn a box around and left for later, the name that connected to the handwritten note on her orders, a name she had sourced from a single oblique reference in a closed congressional oversight memo she had no official reason to have read. Below those names, she now began writing. Day 1, Psalm 0847 O course. Score adjustment applied. Criterion, unfamiliar with modified protocol. Counterfact, reviewed laminated map at 0756. Time logged by range safety at 0803. Other trainees with longer completion times. No adjustment noted. She wrote it in the shorthand she had developed over 3 tours. Clean, fast, indelible. Specific enough to be reconstructed by someone who hadn't been there. Because she had always understood, perhaps more than most, that the only way to fight a system that controlled the rules was to become the most precise recorder of its own violations. The CQB rotation began at 1100 close quarters battle, a 3-room structure configured for a simulated breach and clear. Standard 2-man team formation, 1 primary, 1 cover. She was assigned to a team with Petty Officer 2nd Class Derek Soto, a SEAL trainee who had the build of a college linebacker and the eyes of someone who hadn't quite decided whether he was the person people expected him to be. The brief was short: entry protocol, stack order, radio confirmation before each threshold. The frequency assigned to their team's comms, 44.8. She confirmed 44.8. When she keyed her radio inside the first room, it returned static. She tried twice. Static, she checked the channel display. The radio was set to 47.2. Her radio had been set to the wrong frequency. Either in the brief, which she had memorized precisely, and 44.8 was what had been stated, or afterward, during the 2 minutes between brief and entry when she had been moving into position. She had set it herself to 44.8. She was certain of this. She adapted. Hand signals. Established visible contact with Soto, signaled entry, indicated rotation, indicated cover position for the second room. He was slow to respond, not confused. She could read the difference between confusion and choice in how a man moved. He was waiting for something, or choosing not to give her what she was asking for. She cleared the second room without cover, cleared the third room, completed the sequence. Calloway's write-up: failure to maintain fireteam integrity. Comms failure attributed to operator error. She walked away from the debrief, found the range safety officer, a young petty officer, 3rd class named Garrett, who was responsible for equipment logs, and spoke to him quietly, away from the group. My radio was on 47.2 when I checked it inside the first room, she said. Brief specified 44.8. Can you confirm the frequency log from this morning's equipment issue? Garrett looked at her, looked toward the debrief area, looked back at her. I can check the log, he said carefully. I'm not asking you to do anything with it, just confirm. He pulled up the equipment issue record on his tablet. She watched his face. She could see the moment he found what she expected him to find. The log shows 47.2 was the issued frequency, he said. Brief said 44.8. Thank you, Garrett. She walked away. She did not file anything. She did not confront anyone. She took out her notebook and she wrote. This was the system. Not dramatic, not loud, just patient, specific accumulation. She had learned this not only in the military but before it, in a life that had required her to understand early and completely that the only way to fight a system that controlled the rules was to become the most precise recorder of its own violations. Documentation as armor. Precision as power. That evening, she sat alone in the small room assigned to her in the visiting officer quarters. a space barely large enough for a cot and a desk, with a window that looked out onto the parking lot. She had the overhead light off. The desk lamp cast a pale circle on the notebook. She was reviewing what she had written when she noticed something. The tactical load-bearing strap was gone from her kit locker. She had confirmed this in the morning and managed without it. But she had also, before leaving the gear bay, checked the equipment issue record for her locker. It had listed the strap as issued. Issued. Not missing, not unreturned, issued. Which meant either the initial inventory had been wrong, or someone had removed the item after inventory was recorded and before she opened the locker. Both possibilities told the same story. She looked at the window. The parking lot was half lit, a few vehicles scattered across the asphalt, security lights on metal poles making orange halos in the mist. Then she saw it, a figure, standing near the far end of the lot, not moving, just standing, too far to make out a face. Dark jacket, no visible rank, not a guard. The guards moved, patrolled, had a route. This figure was stationary, oriented toward the building. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then it turned and walked away, absorbed into the shadow between 2 parked vehicles, and was gone. She sat still for a long moment. Then she turned back to her notebook and continued writing. Morning came gray and cold. She was in the base gym at 04:30, which was 40 minutes before anyone else was scheduled to use it. She had not slept badly. She rarely did. She slept like a machine that had been properly shut down and properly restarted. The hours were sufficient. She was 7 minutes into her run on the treadmill when the door opened. The woman who walked in was 41 and moved with the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped having anything to prove. Chief Petty Officer, SEAL insignia. She had close-cropped hair going gray at the edges and the kind of face that was not unfriendly, but was not open either. It was the face of a person whose friendliness was not a default, but a decision. She set her water bottle on the adjacent treadmill, put on headphones, started running. They ran beside each other for 35 minutes without speaking or acknowledging one another. It was not uncomfortable. It was, in its own way, a form of respect. The recognition that not every shared space required conversion into a social event. When Mara reached for her towel, the woman reached for hers at the same moment. They both slowed their machines. "Check your kit locker," the woman said. She was looking at the wall directly in front of her, not at Mara. Her voice was low and without drama. "Number 14. It's not yours, but it fits." Mara dried her face. "Why?" "Because mine was missing once too." The woman pulled her headphones from her ears, looped them around her wrist, and walked to the door on the far side of the gym. She was gone before Mara could ask her name. Mara stood for a moment, then she went to locker 14. The combination was the day's date, which meant someone had reset it recently and deliberately. Inside, a full tactical kit, her size, complete down to the load-bearing strap that had been removed from her own locker. A strip of tape on the strap, black marker, return when done. She suited up, returned her own locker key to its hook, walked out to the training compound. The Combat Stress Gauntlet was a 5-station sequence designed to evaluate performance under accumulated physical stress. Not just fitness, the ability to think clearly after the body had already begun negotiating with itself about how much more it could absorb. Mud lanes, weight carries, elevated platform scrambles, a low-light firing scenario, a final live blank hostage rotation. The sequence was demanding in the way that all useful training was demanding. It told you something true about yourself. Soto was assigned as her partner again. She noted this without visible reaction. She positioned herself at the start of the first lane, adjusted her sling, took one slow breath. The whistle. She moved. The first lane was a mud extraction drag, a 200-pound weighted dummy through a trench section, 60 meters. She put her hips into it and did not waste motion. At the handoff point, Soto was supposed to take the dummy for the second pull. He stumbled on entry to the trench. The dummy's weight transferred back onto her. She took it, did not stop, dragged both her portion and the recovery slack without breaking stride. Time at Station 1, 44 seconds. Par time was 41. The delay was Soto's stumble. It was in the video. It was measurable. Stations 2 through 4 she ran as designed, with the efficiency of someone who had studied the layout and understood which movements were load-bearing and which were theater. She was not performing. She was completing. On Station 5, the fire scenario, she engaged 6 targets in a smoke-filled approximation of a narrow corridor. No misses. Transitioned to casualty extraction, dragged the role player out of the smoke lane, stabilized, called clear. Total time, 4 seconds under par. She knew it was under par because she had been counting. Callaway's write-up cited partner coordination deficits and weight distribution error under contact stress. It did not mention par time. It did not mention the Station 1 delay and its source. It did not mention the 6 clean target engagements. She wrote all of this in her notebook that afternoon, sitting on a bench outside the gear bay in the thin November sun. She wrote without anger because anger was not a tool she found useful. Precision was useful. Consistency was useful. The patience to let a record build itself, line by line, until the weight of it became undeniable. That was useful. She was on the 3rd page now. The base cafeteria was half full at 18:30, the tail end of the evening meal rotation. She took a tray to a table near the back and ate without looking at her phone. She had been eating for 4 minutes when someone set a tray down at the adjacent table. She registered it peripherally without looking up. You documented the frequency error. The voice was low, measured, the statement of a man reporting a known fact, not asking a question. She looked up. He was in his early 50s, in the way that some men are, not looking younger than they are, but looking like their age had been earned rather than accumulated. He was wearing an NSW training shirt with no rank insignia, no name tape, gray at the temples, close cropped. The face of someone who had given a great many orders and had long since stopped needing to raise his voice to give them. He was reading a newspaper. Actual print. He had not looked up from it. Yes, she said. Good. Keep doing that. He turned a page. The sound of it was very loud in the quiet between them. Don't file anything yet. He folded the paper, lifted his tray, stood. Before he turned away, not yet. He walked toward the exit. She watched him go. Then she looked at the trainee 2 tables over. Who is that? The trainee turned, found the figure she was indicating. That's Commander Hargrove, NSW commander. She looked back at the table where he had been sitting. The newspaper was still there, folded precisely in quarters. He was the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command at this installation. He had known about the frequency error from a rotation she had completed 8 hours ago. A rotation for which she had not filed any formal report, had spoken to only one person, and had documented only in a notebook that had not left her person. He had known, which meant he had a source she hadn't identified, or a method of observation she hadn't detected. She looked at the ceiling, thought about the overhead geometry of the CQB structure, about the beam angles, about where a secondary camera could be positioned without being visible from any of the standard sightlines. She thought about a commander who had been watching for long enough to know what she was doing before she had to explain it. Don't file anything yet. She picked up her tray, returned it to the station, walked back to her quarters, and she was very quiet the whole way. The weapon retention drill was the last scheduled evolution of day 3. It was a paired scenario. Weapon retention under force, one partner attempting disarm, the other defending using approved combatives protocol. Force was supposed to be controlled. The training regulations were specific about threshold. She was assigned to Soto again. She had thought about this while running her morning PT. Thought about the pattern of the assignments, the logic of it, the question of whether the assignment was incidental or deliberate. She had reached no definitive conclusion, but she had reached a preparatory one. When Soto entered the sand circle, she could read him. Broad, nervous in a specific way, not afraid of her, afraid of something behind her. The way a man moves when he has been told to do something he is not entirely comfortable with and has not yet found the internal argument that would let him refuse. She squared her stance, sling-clipped, muzzle down, standard posture. He began circling. The first contact was an elbow check to her ribs, not simulated, real force, sharp enough to test whether she would react visibly. She exhaled, she did not react. The second was a shoulder check, harder. Her stance absorbed it. The third was a sling grab. Both hands, a violent forward torque that dug the strap into her collarbone and pulled her weight forward and off-center. Protocol-specified response was authorized after 3 contacts. She responded. Arm across his elbow, step behind his lead foot, hip rotation. She redirected his momentum, not against him, into a controlled position. He stumbled. She had her hand on his shoulder before he finished the stumble, steadying him. She had not struck him. She had not escalated. She had done precisely what the training regulation described in the sequence it described it at the moment it authorized it. Munn's voice hit the air before the motion was complete. She escalated. That's outside parameters. Calloway was already moving. He stepped into the sand circle with the settled authority of a man who had already decided what had happened. Stand down, Captain. That's an assault call under training regulations. Mara looked at him. She looked at him for exactly as long as it took to be certain that nothing she said in this moment would be productive. Then she turned to Soto. You okay? Soto was breathing hard. He looked at her, and for one moment something honest moved through his eyes, something that was not the performance his body language had been running since the rotation began. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I'm good. Good. She walked out of the sand circle, not fast, not slow. The measured pace of someone who has decided the next action and is executing it. I'm pulling you for review board, Captain. Calloway behind her. Noted, Master Chief. She kept walking. In the gear bay, she returned her equipment, changed out of her training kit, sat for a moment on the wooden bench between the locker rows in the amber light of a single overhead bulb, and she breathed. She thought about Quantico, about the desk that was waiting for her, about the offer that was sitting on her phone like a door left open in a cold house. She was not a person who had ever needed to be liked. She had understood very early that being liked and being trusted were different currencies, and she had spent her life accumulating the second at the expense of the first. She did not regret this, but she was not made of stone. There was a weight to this kind of sustained exposure. The weight of absorbing impact after impact without being allowed to return any of what? The cost of stillness when every instinct was formed for motion. She was thinking about this and about nothing else when her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. The voice was male, older, not military in its current tone, but carrying the residue of it in its cadence, the way certain rhythms never fully leave a man. Captain Voss, my name is DeVos. We need to talk. She stood up from the bench. Her notebook was in her breast pocket, pressing lightly against her sternum. She had written his name in it before she ever arrived at Little Creek. She had drawn a box around it and left it for later. Later had arrived. She walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was dark and wet, security lights haloed in the mist. She looked at the far end of the lot, the place where 3 nights ago a figure had stood and watched and then dissolved into shadow. She understood now that the figure had not been random, had not been incidental, had been watching in the particular way of someone calculating an approach, deciding when the moment was right. I know your name, she said. A pause on the line, shorter than she expected. Then you know I was second, he said. She looked at the empty parking lot, thought about the word second, about what it implied about the order of things, about who had been first and how it had ended for them. Tell me, she said, about the first. The rain started again, light and persistent, and Mara Voss stood at the window in the dark and listened. Frank Devos had been out of the Navy for 7 years, but he still talked like a man who expected to be interrupted by an alarm. Short sentences, no wasted syllables. The rhythm of someone who had once lived by brevity, because every extra second was a second the situation could change. He told her about the first candidate in 38 minutes. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Adrian Pace, Navy pilot, 2 combat tours, assigned to CBC IA Cycle 3 as the first female officer in the program's history. She had arrived at Little Creek in March of that year with a service record that, by any measurable standard, put her in the top 5% of anyone who had ever come through NSW training. She had lasted 6 days. The write-ups had been nearly identical to what Mara had already collected in her notebook. Failure to maintain fire team integrity. Equipment discrepancy attributed to operator error. Score adjustment applied. The language was the same because the system was the same, and the system had been running for longer than any single cycle. DeVos had been a senior SEAL instructor during Cycle 3. He had watched what happened to Pace. He had said nothing at the time, a fact he delivered without self-pity or deflection, the flat acknowledgement of a man who had replayed the decision enough times to understand exactly what it had cost. After Pace left the program, he had started asking questions, quietly. The wrong way, as it turned out. He had filed a formal inquiry to the CBCIA Oversight Committee in the fall of that year. By then, he had moved through the command structure, instructor assignments, flag-level advisory roles, the incremental climb that the Navy rewards with title and responsibility in equal measure. The inquiry had been reviewed and closed by the committee's senior naval officer within 9 days. The man who signed the closure order was Rear Admiral Frank DeVos. His own name, his own signature. He had signed an order closing an investigation into his own inaction. He had done it because the 3-star who oversaw his promotion board had told him, in terms that were polite and absolute, that the inquiry was a distraction from program integrity. He had done it because he had believed at the time that protecting the institution was the same thing as protecting the mission. He had spent 7 years understanding that it was not. He told Mara that he had kept copies of everything, the original inquiry, the closure order, the score logs from cycles 3 through 6, the emails, the equipment issue records. He had kept them in a locked filing cabinet in his home in Chesapeake, Virginia, 40 minutes from where she was standing. Why now, she said. Why me? Because the CBCIA committee has a new chair, he said. Someone who actually wants the program to work. Someone who will act on what I have, if it comes from a source that's still inside the system and still credible. She thought about that, and you knew I'd be building a case. I hoped. The note was a gamble. Some people see that kind of thing and go quiet. Some go loud. A pause. You went precise. She said nothing. Don't file yet, he said. Not until Hargrove tells you to. She absorbed this. You know Hargrove. He came to me 8 months ago. He's been building the same case from the inside. Another pause, and in it, she could hear the weight of the years. He needed someone they would actually move against. Someone good enough that what they did to her would be undeniable. She looked at herself in the dark window glass. 34 years old, 3 tours, a scar below her left cheekbone, and a notebook in her breast pocket with 3 pages of documentation. She thought about Adrienne Pace, about a woman she had never met who had walked off a training field 7 years ago and taken something with her that the program was still pretending it hadn't lost. I understand, she said. She ended the call, stood at the window for a long time. Then she opened her notebook to the page where she had written DeVos's name in a box, and she wrote beside it, "Second, not the last." She did not sleep badly that night, but she lay awake for 20 minutes before she closed her eyes, thinking about the word third and what it meant that she was it. Commander Eli Hargrove's office was on the 2nd floor of the NSW headquarters building, a space that managed to be both austere and precise, the office of a man who had stripped away everything that didn't serve the work and kept the things that did with deliberate care. No photographs on the wall, no plaques, a single-frame topographic map of a coastline she didn't immediately recognize, a sealed filing cabinet, a desk that was almost completely clear except for a legal pad, a coffee cup, and a manila folder. The email had arrived at 5:58 the following morning. 8 words, "My office, 700, come alone." Hargrove. She had been awake since 4:30. She sat across from him now, back straight, hands folded, in the same posture she had brought to every brief and every debrief and every formal encounter she had navigated in 11 years of service. The posture that said she was present, she was ready, and she had already done the math. Hargrove looked at her the way men look at things they have been watching from a distance and are now seeing up close for the first time, measuring the gap between expectation and reality. Adjusting. He did not offer her coffee. He did not make preliminary conversation. He opened the manila folder and turned it to face her without preamble. Inside were 4 documents. Score logs from CBCIA cycles 3 through 6. The discrepancies were highlighted in yellow. There were a lot of yellow marks. "You talked to DeVos," he said, not a question. "Last night." "Good." He closed the folder. "Then I don't have to explain the history. I just have to explain the present." He leaned back. Munn has been running a systematic interference operation inside this program for at least 3 cycles. Not ideological, financial. There's a defense contractor currently in the bid process for the next NSW training contract. If CBCIA succeeds, the contract goes to a competing firm. If it fails, if it produces enough documented failures of non-NSW candidates, the program gets canceled and the bid goes to his preferred contractor. She took this in without visible reaction. Who is the contractor? A company called Gray Line Solutions. Munn worked for them for 14 months between his last 2 deployments. Consulting. The relationship didn't end when he re-enlisted. She thought about Munn in the parking lot after the O course, the collegial approach, the offer of clarification, the glance back over his shoulder. "He was assessing me," she said. "From day one, Callaway is a different situation." Hargrove's voice shifted slightly on the name. Not softer, more careful, the way a man speaks about a thing he has been examining from multiple angles without reaching a satisfying conclusion. Callaway genuinely believes what he's doing is right. He thinks CBCIA is an institutional mistake, and that the most efficient way to correct it is to demonstrate that cross-branch candidates can't perform. He's wrong, but he's not corrupt. He's a man who turned his convictions into a method and stopped questioning whether the method had limits. "That doesn't make the outcomes different," she said. "No," Hargrove agreed, "it doesn't." He stood, moved to the filing cabinet, unlocked it. From the second drawer, he removed a small evidence bag containing a printed email chain and placed it on the desk beside the folder. "This is from NSW's Communications Monitoring System. We monitor all official devices in the command." Munn has been careless. He tapped on the bag. "The chain goes to a personal email address. I have enough to identify the recipient. What I don't have yet is the full documentation of the interference operation, which requires a candidate who can perform well enough that the interference becomes statistically undeniable." He looked at her. "Every time I've been close before, they've found a way to make the case look circumstantial. I need more cycles, more data. I need you to keep running." She looked at the email chain through the evidence bag. At the printed text she could not quite read, but could see was dense with specific details. The details of a man who had been meticulous because he thought he was protected. "You've been building this for 2 years, she said. "Yes." and you needed someone they would really move against. He did not flinch from it. Yes, someone good enough that what they do to her is visible. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the base was waking up. The distant sound of a truck, a door, the percussion of a new day beginning its indifferent work. You used me, she said. Yes. He said it the same way he had said everything else. Without apology. Without decoration. And you let me because you understood why before I explained it. She thought about the notebook in her pocket, about the first entry she had made before she ever arrived at Little Creek, about the name she had written in a box. She thought about Adrienne Pace, who had not had a Hargrove and had not had a DeVos willing to tell her the story, and had walked off a training field 7 years ago with something taken from her that she could not get back. Don't file, she said. I know. Not yet. He sat back down, opened the legal pad. You have 8 days left. I need 3 more documented incidents with witnesses, then I can move. She nodded once, stood. She was at the door when he spoke again. Captain. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she had seen rarely enough in her career that she still noticed it when it appeared. The expression of a man who respects something and is choosing to say so with his eyes rather than his mouth. The note on your orders, he said, the one DeVos wrote. What did it say? She studied him for a moment. You already know. I want to know if it worked. She thought about sitting in the parking lot at 5:12 on a Monday morning in November, in a rented car with the engine off, reading 4 words that had been pressed into the paper with a ballpoint pen by a man she had never met. It worked, she said. She left. The combat stress gauntlet was scheduled for 0800 on day 5, and Mara had been awake since 4:30 thinking about it. Not from anxiety, from preparation. She knew the layout, she knew the stations. She had run similar sequences in actual operational contexts where the weights were not dummies and the smoke was not theatrical, and she had come back from all of them with everyone she went in with. What she did not know was what Munn would adjust this time. In the gear bay at 0715, she ran her standard equipment check. Everything present. She ran it again. Still present. She ran the sim rifle's optic check by the method she always used, aiming at a fixed point on the far wall, noting the reticle's position relative to a scratch in the concrete she had identified the first day. The reticle was where it should be. She shouldered the rifle, adjusted her sling, stepped out toward the compound. The gauntlet's first station was a 200-meter sprint under load. 40 pounds on the back and a navigational decision at the midpoint. A route choice between 2 paths that led to the same destination, but with different obstacle profiles. She had memorized both paths from the layout board. She had also, yesterday afternoon, walked both physical paths during the open compound period and confirmed the actual surface conditions against the layout board. The layout board had not been updated. The right side path, which the board indicated as the clean route, had a segment of soft ground near its midpoint from recent drainage work. The left side path, which the board indicated as the obstacle route, was actually the faster option by at least 4 seconds under load. She took the left path. 3 other trainees, following the board, took the right path. She completed the first station 11 seconds under par. Calloway noted nothing about her navigation. He would have marked an incorrect route choice as a performance deficiency. A correct one apparently simply did not require acknowledgement. She filed this in her notebook. Station 2 was the elevated platform scramble. 3-point contact protocol, no wasted motion. She cleared it in the second best time of the rotation. Station 3 was the ammo relay. Magazine exchange under simulated contact pressure. The kind of drill that separated people who had trained for it from people who had done it when the pressure was real. Her hands moved through the sequence without consultation from her conscious mind. They had done this often enough that they knew what came next without being told. Station 4 was a low-light corridor traverse with pop-up targets. She moved through it clean, no hesitation, no misses. She reached in Station 5, the final live blank fire scenario with casualty extraction, and something was different. She felt it before she identified it, a change in the weight distribution of the rifle. Subtle, a 1/4-inch shift in the optic housing. She brought the rifle up and aimed at the fixed point she always used. The reticle was 3 mils to the left of where it had been 40 minutes ago. Someone had adjusted the optic between the gear bay and Station 5. It was not possible to do this accidentally. The adjustment screw required a tool and deliberate rotation. Whoever had done it during the station transition period, a 4-minute window while candidates were moving between positions. She stood with the rifle up and she ran the math. 3 mils at this distance meant an offset of approximately 3.5 inches at the target range. Manageable. She shifted her point of aim to the right by the calculated amount. Held her breath. 6 targets, 6 engagements, 6 clean hits. She dropped into casualty extraction without breaking stride. Dragged the role player out of the smoke lane, stabilized, called clear. Her total gauntlet time was 4 seconds under par. Munn was standing near the scoring table when she came off the final station. He was watching her with the expression of a man whose calculation has not produced the expected result. Not angry, recalibrating. "Good run, Captain," he said. She stopped, looked at him directly. "The optic on Station 5 was 3 mils off from Gear Bay baseline," she said. Her voice was conversational, level. "You should flag it for maintenance before the next rotation." "A beat. 2 beats. I'll pass that along," he said. She looked at him for exactly 1 additional second. Then she walked toward the scoring table. His smile was gone, not from anger, from the particular kind of cold sobriety that settles over a man who realizes that the thing he thought he was ahead of has been measuring him the entire time. She did not look back. In his office on the far side of the compound, Munn closed the door and sat down. He did not sit at his desk. He sat in the single chair by the window, the one he used when he was thinking, and he set his phone face up on his knee. The phone showed a text thread he had been managing for 6 weeks. 23 messages, all going to the same personal email address, all forwarded from what he believed was an untraceable relay. He had believed this because the man who set it up for him had told him it was untraceable, and Munn had verified this claim the way intelligent men sometimes verify things they want to be true, by asking the person most interested in his believing it. The problem was the optic. She had offset 3 mils by hand. No complaint, no hesitation, no loss of accuracy. 6 targets, 6 hits. The kind of adjustment that required either years of experience at extended ranges or a specific and unusual training background that was not listed in the service record he had been given. He pulled up the service record on his tablet: Marine, Force Recon, 3 tours, standard qualifications. Nothing that explained what he had just seen. He set the tablet down, picked up his phone, typed, "She compensated for the optic. 3 mils, no degradation. What's her actual background?" He sent it, set the phone back on his knee. He sat there for 4 minutes waiting for a response that did not come. Then he stood up, went to his desk, and began drafting a new modification for the adversarial capture drill. The role-player briefing would need to be adjusted. The comms plan would need to be rebuilt. And Soto would need to be handled more carefully this time. The young petty officer had been reluctant from the beginning, and reluctance, Munn had learned, had a way of becoming something else if you applied pressure at the wrong angle. He wrote for 30 minutes. When he was done, he read it back. It was a good plan. It was a careful plan. It accounted for the comms window, for Soto's positioning, for the role player's escalation threshold. It accounted for everything he could control. The thing he could not account for was the optic. Not the optic itself. The optic was already done, already flagged in his head as a failed approach he would not repeat. What he could not account for was the way she had handled it, the absence of hesitation. The 3-second assessment followed by an immediate correction, precise, documented in her score by the range safety's timestamp, undeniable. He had spent 14 years in naval special warfare. He had run training operations on 3 continents. He had never seen a first-time candidate absorb an unexpected equipment modification at a live station and compensate without breaking stride. He sat with this for longer than he intended. The contractor had given him a service record. Marine, Force Recon, 3 deployments. A solid operator by any standard. The record had described someone he could manage. It had not described what he had watched this morning. Either the record was incomplete, or there was a category of competence that service records did not capture. And both possibilities pointed toward the same problem, which was that he had been operating on an assessment of her that was no longer accurate. He looked at his phone again. Still no response from the handler. That was the second silence in 3 days. He put the plan in his desk drawer, locked it, turned off the light. He told himself it would hold. He told himself this with slightly less conviction than usual. That evening, she sat in her car in the parking lot rather than her quarters. Not because the quarters were unsafe, but because the car was a space no one controlled except her. She had the notebook open on the steering wheel, and she was writing in the amber light of the overhead dome lamp. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Quantico, the same number 3 different times between 1400 and 1730. She knew what they were about. The deadline for accepting the biometric intelligence assignment was in 48 hours. After that, the position would go to the next candidate on their list. She set the phone face down on the passenger seat. She wrote until she had recorded every measurable detail from the gauntlet rotation. Optic deviation, quantified. Station 5 timeline, logged. Munn's exact words, quoted. Her own response, quoted. The absence of maintenance documentation for the optic noted, with the inference clearly labeled as inference and not confirmed fact. When she was done, she sat for a moment with the notebook closed in her lap, her hands resting on its cover, and she allowed herself to think about what it would feel like to call Quantico back. She thought about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then she put the notebook in her pocket and went inside. She sat on the edge of her cot and she stayed very still for a while. The room had a single window that looked out over the service road running between the officer quarters and the maintenance bay. A concrete wall. Beyond the wall, the ordinary sounds of a base continuing its night work. Vehicles moving, generators running, the occasional clang of equipment in the dark. She was not listening to any of it. She was sitting with a smell that had arrived without invitation, the way it sometimes did when the weight on her became specific enough to locate a source. Gun oil and dust, dry earth disturbed, Helmand province in the summer. She was on her second deployment, 27 years old, and a collapsed building had 3 of her men inside it. She had 40 seconds to make a decision that was not her decision to make. The extraction team was 7 minutes out. The protocol was clear. She had looked at the building, still making the low grinding sound of a structure negotiating with gravity. And she had calculated 7 minutes against that sound. The calculation had not been close. She had rigged the line herself. She had gone in. The third man was Corporal Tyrese Hammond, a daughter 6 weeks old at home in Memphis, who had never seen his face. Compound fracture of the left tibia, dislocated shoulder, conscious enough to grab the line when she put it in his hands. She had brought him out. The extraction team arrived at 3 minutes 40 seconds. 7 minutes would have been too late. She had known it. She had gone anyway. The investigation ran 6 months. The finding, judgment above rank, not disciplinary, not commendable. The line that means we don't know what to do with this, so we are doing nothing. She had not been angry. She had understood it the way she understood most things that were true and inconvenient at the same time, clearly without illusion, with enough patience to let the understanding settle into something she could carry without it working against her. She was thinking about Tyrese Hammond and about whether his daughter was old enough now to ask questions. 6 years old this winter. Old enough to start asking why her father sometimes looked at the middle distance when he thought no one was watching. She was thinking about this, sitting on the edge of a cot in the dark in Virginia, when she understood what was keeping her here. Not strategy, not obligation, not the documentation or the sealed cabinet in Hargrove's office, or the evidence bag with Munn's email chain. It was simpler than that. It was the same thing it had always been. Soto had stepped forward that morning. No case file, no commander at his back, nothing to protect him except the decision itself. He had made his calculation and acted before the nerve could fail. She was not going to leave before what he had started was finished. She picked up her phone. Across the compound, in a different kind of dark, Master Chief Brent Calloway sat alone in his office with the lights off. He had not turned them off intentionally. He had been reading the CBCIA scoring records when the daylight faded, and at some point between the late afternoon and the early evening, the overhead fluorescent had cycled off automatically, and he had not bothered to get up and turn it back on because the screen of his laptop provided enough light to read by. And the reading was what mattered. 27 years, that was what he had. Not an abstraction, not a number to cite in arguments about qualification. 27 years of actual operational service in naval special warfare, beginning with Bud's Class 211 in the summer of the year he turned 24, running through 5 deployments in 4 commendations, and the particular accumulation of credibility that comes from surviving, repeatedly, the kind of situations that do not leave men unchanged. He had come to CBCIA because he believed in it, not the program, the inverse of the program. He believed that the Naval Special Warfare Pipeline existed for reasons that were not administrative, not theoretical, not subject to the preferences of oversight committees. He believed that the selection process was a filter, and that the function of a filter was to exclude, and that the value of the filter was inseparable from the strictness of its criteria. He had believed this with the completeness of a man who had gone through the filter himself and understood its purpose from the inside, who had stood on the beach at Coronado in the gray pre-dawn and made decisions about himself that most people never face, and had arrived on the other side of those decisions as something different from what he had been going in. He had not believed he was wrong about this. He still did not believe he was wrong about this. But he was looking at a column of numbers. The NSW automated scoring system ran a parallel assessment on every CBCIA candidate, independent of instructor marks. It drew from sensor data, time codes, the electronic records embedded in training equipment. Calloway had known about this system for years. He had never considered consulting it for Cycle 7 because he had not needed to. His assessments were precise. His records were accurate. He had pulled the automated scores tonight out of a curiosity that he would not have been able to articulate precisely. A kind of itch at the edge of his professional certainty that had started, if he was honest, somewhere around the moment Maravos had absorbed a sling grab and responded with a redirect so clean it looked rehearsed. The automated score for Captain Maravos, aggregated across all Day 1 through Day 6 evaluations, was 91.4, the highest score in the history of BCI A Cycle 7, the second highest automated score in the history of the entire program. He sat with this number for a long time. His own instructor marks gave her a 63.8, below the threshold for program continuation. He looked at the gap between those two numbers. 47 minutes passed. He was not conscious of the time passing. He was doing something he had not done in a long time, which was the particular kind of thinking that requires suspending the conclusions you have already reached in order to look clearly at the evidence that is actually in front of you. He thought about the word integrity. He had used it often. It was the word that justified the strictness of his standards. The word that explained why the filter could not be loosened without losing the thing that made it meaningful. He was sitting in the dark thinking about what it meant that he had applied the word to the standards and had not applied it to the records. He reached forward, opened a new document on his laptop, stared at the blank page for a moment. Then he began to write. The following morning, before the 700 formation, Petty Officer Second Class Derek Soto appeared at a place she had not expected to find him. She was crossing the open ground between the visiting officer quarters and the training compound when she heard footsteps behind her and turned. He was alone. No Calloway, no Munn. His hands were in his jacket pockets and his face had the expression of a man who had been rehearsing something for long enough that the rehearsal was starting to sound wrong. Captain? He stopped 3 feet away, looked at the ground for a moment, then up. I wanted to say something. She waited. The CQB rotation. Day 2. My radio was on the right frequency before the brief. I checked it. He said this quickly, as if getting the facts out before the nerve failed. After the brief, when we were moving to the entry point, Munn came by and asked to see it, said he wanted to confirm equipment functionality. A pause. When he gave it back, it was on 47.2. She looked at him steadily. His hands were probably not steady inside his jacket pockets. He was taking a risk that was not small, and he was doing it before anyone had asked him to, and that mattered. Thank you, Petty Officer, she said. I didn't say anything at the time. He met her eyes, not quite able to hold it, but trying. I should have. You're saying it now. Something in his face shifted slightly. The particular shift of a person who has braced for judgment and received something else instead. She turned and kept walking. She heard him standing behind her for a moment, and then the sound of his footsteps moving in the opposite direction. She reached into her pocket, found the notebook, wrote 3 lines without stopping her stride. The adversarial capture protocol drill was scheduled for the afternoon of Day 7, and it was the most complex sequence in the CBCIA structure, a multi-room target location and extraction under simulated hostile conditions. High-value assets somewhere inside a building, protected by role players with variable resistance levels, candidate working under time pressure with incomplete intelligence. The brief for this drill was 23 minutes. Calloway ran it without notes. The assignment of teams came at the end. When Calloway said Voss, primary, Soto, support, Munn was standing near the right wall, and he did not move, did not react visibly. But something changed in the quality of his stillness. The stillness of a man who has received the information he was waiting for and is now processing what comes next. She noticed this. She wrote nothing yet. There was nothing yet to write. In the 90 minutes between the brief and the drill start time, there was gear prep, a brief review of the building schematic, and a period of open movement through the compound. She used the open movement period to walk the exterior of the target building twice at different speeds, noting the placement of every entry point, the sight lines from the windows, the sound profile of the ground surface on different approach angles. She did not see Munn during this period, which meant he was somewhere she wasn't, doing something she wasn't yet aware of. She checked her sim rifle with focused attention. Optic, clean, baseline consistent, barrel, clean, magazine seating firm. She ran the function check 3 times. Then she checked the backup pistol in her thigh holster. Then she checked the zip tie kit in her left cargo pocket. She moved to the staging area. Soto was already there. He looked at her and then away. She said, same as before, 2-man entry. I'll take primary breach. You take cover on threshold, maintain sight line, call clear before I advance. He nodded. His hands were on his rifle and his jaw was tight. He was nervous in a way she recognized, not the nervous of a man carrying secret instructions, the nervous of a man who no longer had them, who was standing in a familiar formation without the structure that had previously told him what to do inside it. She understood this kind of nervous. She had seen it in Marines who had been given bad orders and had followed them and then had to stand in the aftermath and decide what they were. It was not cowardice. It was a man taking the measure of himself and finding the measurement difficult. She looked at him directly. "You're clear on the protocol?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then run it straight." Something in his jaw unclenched by the smallest degree. "Yes, ma'am." The whistle. She moved. The entry was clean. She used the sound of the building, the particular acoustic signature of an enclosed multi-room structure, the way noise reflected and absorbed differently depending on the density of objects inside, to orient before she was fully through the threshold. There were 3 rooms to the left and a corridor to the right. The schematic had shown the high-value assets likely position as the rear room, northwest corner. The schematic, she had already noted, was from the previous CBCIA cycle and had not been verified against the current building configuration. A door that the schematic showed as interior had been converted to an exterior access point, which meant the northwest corner was now accessible from outside the building as well as inside. She adjusted, cleared left rooms first. 2 role players, both went passive on contact, which was the standard resistance level for this rotation. She neutralized both without force, zip-tied both per protocol, advanced. The corridor to the right was where the actual complication lived. Soto, on comms, reported her position as the left side of the building. She was in the right corridor. She heard his voice and understood immediately that the misreport was intentional. His voice had the particular flatness of a man reading something he had been handed, not describing something he was seeing. She did not correct it on comms. She kept moving. The role player in the rear room had been briefed differently. She could tell from the first moment of contact, the way he positioned his body was not defensive, it was preparatory. He was going to make this difficult, not resistant in the scripted sense, actively difficult in the way of someone who had been told to manufacture a threshold breach. He came at her with a low grab, targeting her knees, trying to take her off balance. She checked his angle with her forearm, stepped through to his outside, and used his own momentum to turn him into the wall. Not a strike, not an escalation, a redirect. His face met the wall with his own force, and none of hers. He went passive. She had him zip-tied and on his feet in 11 seconds. She began the extraction. Moving toward the exit with the role player, Soto finally visible now at the corridor threshold, watching her come. His face was doing something complicated. She brought the high-value asset to the extraction point. Called clear. Total time, 2 minutes 41 seconds. Par time was 3 minutes 10. Calloway stepped forward. He did not have his clipboard. That was unusual. He had not had his clipboard because he had not expected to need to be writing things down. He had expected a different outcome. He looked at her, then at Soto, then back at her. 4 infractions, he said. Comms failure, deviated from assigned route, excessive force in the rear room, asset handling outside protocol. She said nothing. I'm recommending review board suspension pending a formal assessment. He said it with the controlled delivery of a man who has made many such announcements and knows exactly how they are supposed to sound. Then from the back of the formation, a voice, not loud, but carrying. Master Chief, request permission to file a discrepancy report. Petty Officer Second Class Derek Soto stepped forward from the observer line. His hands were not in his pockets, and he was not looking at the ground. His jaw was set with the particular resolution of someone who has weighed the cost of a decision and decided to pay it regardless. I misstated Captain Voss's position on comms during the drill. I was given incorrect information to pass by Senior Chief Munn before the drill began. I have documentation. He reached into his jacket, extracted a folded piece of paper and his phone. The text message was sent to my personal number at 0934 this morning. The formation was absolutely still. Calloway's face did not move. But something behind it did. Something deep and involuntary, the kind of internal motion that a man with a lifetime in this work has learned to keep off his face but cannot always keep out of his eyes. He looked at Munn. Munn was standing near the scoring table with his arms crossed and his jaw tight and his face arranged in an expression of controlled blankness. The expression of a man who has just discovered that the structure he was standing on has developed a crack and is calculating whether it will hold his weight. Travis, Calloway said, just the name, very quiet. Munn did not answer. Commander Eli Hargrove stepped out of the observer line. He had been standing there the entire time. In the formation, not above it, not at a distance, present, in the middle of the group, watching. He was wearing a standard NSW training uniform. He had been there since before the drill began. He walked forward at a pace that suggested nothing was urgent, because nothing needed to be. He stopped in front of the scoring table. He set his hands flat on it and looked at the assessment logs. Then he looked at Munn, then at Calloway. "Everyone with an observation to log," he said, "forms up on me. Now." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality of a voice that had been directing complex operations for enough years that it had stopped requiring volume to produce compliance. 7 members of the formation moved toward him. 3 did not. Munn stood very still. His arms were still crossed. His calculation was visible. Not on his face, but in the particular quality of his immobility, the way a man goes still when he is running scenarios in real time and finding that none of them produce a favorable outcome. He had built the adversarial drill carefully. He had believed it was airtight. He had not accounted for Soto deciding, entirely on his own, to walk across an open stretch of ground at 06:15 in the cold and say the thing he had been told not to say. That was the part that was not in his calculation, the part that never was. Calloway was looking at a point approximately 6 feet in front of him, on the ground. He was not looking at Hargrove. He was not looking at Munn. He had trusted Munn the way men in closed professional environments trust the people who share their convictions, not through verification, through resonance. He had not been looking for evidence because the resonance had felt like evidence. He understood now, standing in the November air, that the feeling of certainty and the fact of it were not the same thing, and that he had been treating them as identical for longer than this cycle. He looked at Munn. Munn did not look back. Calloway had known Travis Munn for 9 years. He did not know the man who was standing 3 feet away from him with his arms crossed and his calculation running. Mara stood at the extraction point with her sim rifle at low ready, and she looked at none of them. She looked at the building she had just come through. At the exterior access point, the schematic had failed to show. At the chalk mark on the door frame that someone had put there in a previous cycle and that no one had bothered to erase. She thought about the word third. She thought about what it meant to be the last. Her phone was in her cargo pocket. She had not checked it since morning formation. She put her hand on her pocket, felt the outline of the phone through the fabric, did not take it out. The evening was the color of old pewter, flat and even, the sky pressing down on the Chesapeake Basin as if it had decided the day had been long enough. She sat in her quarters on the edge of the comm, notebook open on her knee, writing. She wrote the drill sequence, the comm's misreport, Soto's statement, the exact words Calloway had used, the exact number of seconds Munn had stood with his arms crossed before Hargrove's words reached him. She wrote Hargrove's entry into the formation, and she stopped at the word present. He had been there the whole time, not watching from above, not observing from outside. Present, in the group, positioned where any of the men around him could have turned and seen him. He had not hidden. He had simply been there in a way that required no one to notice him until it was time. She thought about what that kind of patience cost. The patience of a man who had been building something for 2 years, who had watched a system fail people before he had enough to act, who had made the calculation that the most powerful position in any structure was not above it, but inside it. She understood that she had been making the same calculation the whole time. From the moment she sat in the parking lot and read 4 words written by a man she didn't know. From the moment she opened her notebook before the first drill and began writing not because she was angry, but because precision was the only weapon that left no room for reinterpretation. She thought about Soto stepping forward. No case file, no 2 years of documentation, no senior officer at his back. Just a young man who had been handed a choice between the institution's version of the story and the true one, and had decided at 06:15 on a cold morning that he was going to live with the true one. That had cost him something. It would cost him more before it was over. She knew this, and she did not pretend otherwise. She closed the notebook, set it on the bed beside her, picked up her phone. 3 missed calls. Quantico, the most recent one at 1842. She called them back. The officer who answered was professional, efficient, and ready to take her acceptance. She said, "I need 48 more hours to confirm my decision." A pause. "Captain Voss, the committee has other candidates prepared to accept." "I understand, I need 48 hours. Another pause, longer. "I'll note the extension request, but I can't guarantee the position holds past." "I understand," she said again. "Thank you." She ended the call, set the phone on the cot beside the notebook, sat in the dark for a moment with her hands resting on her knees. She was not certain the position would hold. She was not certain what came next. She was certain only of what she was not willing to do, which was leave before the thing was finished, and what she owed to the people who had already paid to make the finish possible. She lay back on the cot, stared at the ceiling. In the morning there would be 2 more drills, 2 more days. Hargrove needed 3 documented incidents with witnesses, and he now had them. Whatever came next would come from him, and she trusted that it would be enough because she had watched a man who had been waiting for 2 years choose his moment with the patience of someone who understood that a premature action was the only way to lose a case you had already built. She closed her eyes. The rain had stopped sometime in the last hour. The base outside was quiet in the way that places built for intensity are quiet when the intensity has temporarily paused. A held breath, not a rest. She slept. Mun did not sleep. This became clear the following morning when she saw him at 0610 near the equipment check station, his eyes carrying the particular texture of a man who has spent the night in conversation with his own decisions. He looked at her when she walked past, not the calibrating glance of the first days, not the amused assessment of a man who has convinced himself he is several steps ahead. He looked at her with the expression of a person who has been running numbers all night and has arrived at a sum he does not like. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. She went into the gear bay, checked her kit, wrote one line in her notebook. Then she went out to run the drills, and she ran them the same way she had run every drill, with the complete attention of a person who has never made the mistake of assuming that winning the argument is the same as finishing the work. The Day 8 debrief was for the final evaluation sequence, a combined evolution drawing from all previous drill categories, the most complex sequence in the CBCIA program. Multiple stations, cross-referenced, scoring, no single authority for any individual assessment. It was designed, according to the program documentation, to remove the possibility of evaluator bias by distributing the scoring across 5 independent assessors. Calloway ran the brief. His voice was the same. His posture was the same. But he had stopped looking at her in that particular way. The deliberate non-acknowledgement, the careful erasure of her presence from his visual field. He looked at her now, not with anger, not with apology, with something that did not yet have a name, but that she thought, with time, might eventually become recognition. She would not pretend she knew what was happening inside him, but she had watched enough men arrive at difficult realizations over the course of her career to understand the external signs. The particular quality of a man who is in the process of deciding whether the thing he has been certain of is the thing he will remain certain of. She took her seat, opened her notebook to a fresh page. The final entry she would make in this notebook, she had decided, would be the truest one. Not the most dramatic, not the most satisfying, just the truest. The one that said what had actually happened and why, and to what effect, written in the language of observable fact rather than the language of grievance. She pressed the pen to the page, wrote the date, the time. Day 8, 600. Outside, the sun was coming up over the Chesapeake, pale and unsteady, the kind of light that has to fight for what it gets in November. It came through the narrow window above the briefing room door and lay across the floor in a thin stripe that moved as she watched, very slowly, the way light always moves when you are paying attention to it. She watched it for a moment, then she looked up. Calloway was at the front of the room. He had paused mid-sentence. He was looking directly at her, which he had not done voluntarily since the first morning. He held the look for 1 second. Then he continued the brief. She wrote one more line in the notebook. Then she capped her pen and folded her hands and listened. And the stripe of light on the floor kept moving. And somewhere outside the base, the Chesapeake was doing what the Chesapeake always did, running wide and gray and indifferent toward the sea, carrying everything that had been put into it towards somewhere that was not here, towards something that was not yet decided. She was still here. She was still running. And Munn had not slept. And Calloway was looking at her now, and Soto had stepped forward, and Hargrove had been present in the formation the whole time. And the notebook in her pocket had 31 pages of documentation written in the hand of a woman who had understood from the first morning that the only question was never whether she was good enough. The only question had always been whether the truth was loud enough once it was finally allowed to speak. She thought it was. She thought it was about to find out. The disciplinary review convened at 800 on day 9 in a room that had been used for exactly this purpose many times before. You could tell this from the arrangement of the furniture, which had the particular precision of a space where people had learned, through repetition, that the physical distance between chairs carried meaning. The table was metal, bolted to the floor. The chairs on one side faced the chairs on the other side with the honesty of an arrangement that was not pretending to be anything other than what it was. Mara sat against the right wall, not at the table, against the wall in a chair that placed her slightly outside the primary line of sight between the two sides, close enough to hear everything and far enough to be easily overlooked. This was not an accident. Hargrove had told her where to sit before the room filled. She had arrived early. She had her notebook, but she did not open it. She did not need to. 31 pages of documentation, 11 days of accumulated precision, and she knew every word of it without looking. She had written it in the first place so that she would never have to rely on memory in a room like this. But the memory had come anyway, The way things you've handled enough times eventually become part of the texture of your hands. The room filled in a specific order that told its own story. Hargrove's two designated observers entered first, both senior enlisted, both from outside the NSW Little Creek command structure. They carried tablets and sat without speaking. Then came the JAG officer, a lieutenant commander named Fielding, who had the efficient manner of a person who had read every document in the case file at least 3 times and was prepared to answer any question without consulting her notes. Then came a man Mara had not seen before in civilian clothes, carrying a leather portfolio, who sat near Fielding and whose presence she filed as significant without yet being able to say why. Then Calloway, then Soto. Calloway sat on the far side of the table. He was in his dress uniform. His posture was the same posture she had observed on every other morning at Little Creek. Upright, economical. The posture of a man who has spent enough years in formal environments that the spine has made its own decision. But something was different in the quality of his stillness. The stillness of the first days had been the stillness of containment, of a man holding a position with deliberate force. This stillness was something else, quieter. The stillness of a man who has put something down. Soto sat apart from Calloway by the length of 2 empty chairs. He was in his working uniform. His hands were flat on his knees, and he was looking at the table with the contained intensity of someone who has made a decision that he is now living inside, and who is discovering that living inside a decision is a different experience from making it. Munn entered last. He came in with the walk of a man who had decided, sometime in the night, that the most effective response to an untenable situation was to appear unthreatened by it. His arms were at his sides. His face was neutral. He took the chair at the end of the table, the position with the most visual distance from Hargrove, and he set his hands on the table in front of him and looked at the room with the expression of someone waiting for a process he has already evaluated and found manageable. He had been wrong about most of his evaluations in the past 9 days. This one was also wrong. Hargrove walked in at 800 exactly. No aid, no ceremony. He set a single folder on the table, the same folder Mara had seen in his office, thicker now with additional documents. He did not sit. He stood at the head of the table and looked at each person in the room in the particular sequence of a man who has assigned a meaning to the order, and then he spoke. This is an administrative review. Under NavSpec Warcom Instruction 5420.1 concerning conduct and performance integrity in the CBC IA program, Cycle 7. Everything said in this room is on record. He looked at the civilian with the leather portfolio. Counsel for Senior Chief Munn is present and noted. Munn had retained personal legal counsel. He had done this overnight. The speed of that decision was itself a piece of information. Hargrove opened the folder. He did not lift the documents from it. He simply opened it so that the contents were visible to the people directly across from him, and then he began. He spoke for 14 minutes without interruption. He did not raise his voice. He did not use the language of accusation or the language of grievance. He used the language of records, because that was what he had, and records in sufficient quantity and precision do not require amplification. He read from the automated scoring logs, the equipment maintenance records, the communications intercepts from NSW's monitoring system, and the formal statements of 7 witnesses who had submitted written accounts of specific incidents during the CBC IA Cycle 7 evaluation period. The last document he referenced was not in the folder. He picked it up from the chair beside him, where it had been sitting face down on the seat, and he placed it on the table and slid it to the center. It was a printed email chain. 14 messages. The chain ran between a device registered to Senior Chief Travis Munn and a personal email address that Hargrove's office had traced through 3 forwarding relays to a senior account manager at Grayline Solutions. Munn's counsel leaned forward and examined the printout for approximately 30 seconds. Then he leaned back. He did not say anything to Munn. He wrote something on a yellow legal pad that Mara could not read from her position. Munn looked at the printout for a long time. He looked at it with the expression of a man looking at something he built himself from the inside out and is now seeing from the outside for the first time, understanding in that particular way the shape it has to other eyes. He said nothing. Hargrove looked at him across the table and his voice did not change. Senior Chief Munn, you coordinated the systematic interference of a BCIA candidate's assessment over a 9-day period using your access to training equipment, partner assignments, and role-player briefs. You did this at the direction of, and in financial relationship with, a defense contractor currently in active bid competition for an NSW training contract. This is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice under Articles 92, 107, and 134. Your counsel has been provided the full documentation package. Munn's counsel said something quietly to Munn. Munn nodded once. He looked at the table. He did not look at Calloway. Hargrove turned. Master Chief Calloway. Calloway met his eyes. You scored Captain Voss at 63.8 across the evaluation period. The NSW automated assessment system scored her at 91.4. The discrepancy between those numbers is not attributable to evaluator interpretation. It is attributable to the systematic misrecording of performance data across 14 individual assessments. Hargrove paused. I believe you know that. The room was very quiet. Calloway said, yes, sir. 2 words. The first time in 9 days that Calloway had offered a direct confirmation to a direct statement without qualification or counterframing. 2 words and the particular quality of them. Not defeated, not apologetic, something more precise than either of those things. The quality of a man telling the truth in a room where the truth has been a long time coming. Hargrove said, do you want to speak to the context? Calloway looked at the table, then he looked up. I believe the program was wrong. I believe the right response to a wrong policy was to enforce the standards strictly enough that the policy would fail on its own weight. He paused. I was not working for Greyline. I was not coordinating with Munn's activities, which I was not aware of until yesterday. Another pause. But I recorded false assessments, and I did it because I thought the outcome justified the method. His jaw tightened once. Released. That was wrong. The method was wrong, not because the policy was right, because a false record is a false record regardless of what it's trying to prove. He said this with the flatness of a man who has been awake all night arriving at a conclusion and is now delivering it without embellishment because the embellishment would be dishonest. And the one thing he was no longer willing to be in this room at this table was dishonest. Hargrove looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was not softness exactly and was not hardness either. Something closer to recognition. Noted, he said. He turned to the rest of the room. The following actions are effective immediately. Senior Chief Travis Munn is suspended from all duties pending formal investigation under UCMJ Articles 92, 107, and 134. This matter will be referred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service for full investigation, including the financial relationship with Greyline Solutions. NCIS has been notified and will take custody of all relevant communications records. Munn's counsel wrote something else on the legal pad. Master Chief Brent Calloway is relieved of all CBC-IA instructional authority effective today. A formal performance review will be conducted under NAV-SPEC WARCOM procedures. The specifics of that review are between this command and Master Chief Calloway. A pause, and in the pause the distinction was clear. What was happening to Munn and what was happening to Calloway were not the same category of thing. Petty Officer Soto's formal statement is entered into the record. No adverse action will be taken against Petty Officer Soto in connection with this matter. Soto, sitting in his chair with his hands flat on his knees, exhaled very slightly. The kind of exhale that has been held for more than 24 hours. Hargrove closed the folder. The CBCIA Cycle 7 assessment will be completed under independent evaluation protocols beginning at 1000. Independent evaluators from NAV-SPEC WARCOM headquarters will administer all remaining assessments. Body cameras will be active. Scoring will be centralized and transparent. He picked up the folder, looked at the room one more time. That's all. The room began to clear. People stood, gathered their things, moved toward the door with the particular efficiency of people who have been inside a pressurized space and are relieved to be outside it. Mara stayed in her chair until most of them had gone. She was watching Calloway. He stood at the table for a moment after the others moved. He picked up his cover, turned it in his hands once. The motion of a man who needs something to do with his hands while something else runs its course. He looked at her. She looked back. He did not speak. Neither did she. There was nothing that needed to be said in language. What passed between them in those 4 or 5 seconds was not apology and was not forgiveness. Because neither of those things was appropriate yet, and both of them knew it. It was something simpler. The acknowledgement from one person to another that both of them had been in the same room for the same 9 days and had seen what there was to see, and that the record of it was now what it was. He put on his cover, walked out. Mara sat in the empty room for a moment longer. The morning light had shifted while they were inside, moving from its early pale gray to something a degree warmer. The kind of light that November produces occasionally, briefly, as if reminding you that it remembers what summer felt like. She opened her notebook, turned to page 31, the last entry, read it once. Then she turned to page 32 and wrote 2 lines. Then she capped her pen and stood up and went to run the final drills. The independent evaluation began at 1000, and it had a different quality from everything that had preceded it in the last 9 days. Not easier, more honest. The difference between a scale that has been calibrated and one that has not is not that the calibrated one gives you better numbers. It is that it gives you accurate ones. And accuracy, Mara had always believed, was the only starting point from which anything useful could be built. 5 independent evaluators, all senior enlisted from outside the Little Creek command structure. Body cameras running on every evaluator and on the range safety officers at each station. Scoring fed in real time to a central system that aggregated without human intermediation. She stood at the first station at 10:04 and she took one breath and she ran. The breacher lane first, explosive entry simulation, threshold clear, advance to position. She moved through it the way she moved through everything, without performance, without self-consciousness, with the complete attention of a person who is doing the thing and not watching herself do it. Entry time, 0.6 of a second under par. The casualty drag, 200-pound weighted form through a 70-meter extraction corridor with simulated smoke at the midpoint. She found her grip, set her hips, and moved. The smoke didn't change what she could see because she wasn't navigating by sight through the smoke. She had walked the corridor 3 times before the evaluation began, and she had memorized the surface, the slope, the single patch of uneven ground at the 50-meter mark where the drainage was slightly raised. She adjusted her stride at exactly the right moment and never broke pace. Time 18% under par. The CQB sequence. 3 rooms, variable threats, 2 simulated friendlies who were not where the scenario brief had placed them. She adapted at the first threshold when she read the room and found it different from the brief. Cleared all 3 rooms. 0 violations, 0 friendly contacts. Time, inside par. The low-light corridor. She had done this before, in conditions that were not simulated and for stakes that were not scored. Her performance in the low-light corridor at Little Creek on this November morning was, by any measurable standard, the performance of someone for whom this kind of work had long since moved from learned skill to integrated reflex. The live blank final scenario. A role player who was following the brief as written, not fighting harder than the scenario specified, not going passive at the strategically inconvenient moment, not misreporting her position to someone standing at a scoring table. Just a drill, run as designed, and she ran it as designed. Total time for the full evaluation sequence, 4 minutes, 31 seconds. Par time, 5 minutes, 20 seconds. She walked off the final station and stood in the pale November sun and let her breathing return to its baseline, and she did not look at the scoring monitors, and she did not look at the evaluators, and she did not look for anyone's reaction. She had run what she had run. It was in the numbers now, and the numbers belonged to the record. And the record was no longer something anyone at Little Creek could revise. She looked at the horizon, the base perimeter fence. Beyond it, the flat gray-green of the Virginia coast in late autumn, the bare trees, the sky that had been deciding all morning whether to produce more rain and had not yet committed. Someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned. Chief Petty Officer Donna Reyes was standing at the edge of the evaluation area. Not in the evaluator line, off to the side near the equipment racks, in the position of someone who has stopped in the course of doing something else and is not intending to make an occasion of the stop. She had a gear bag over one shoulder and a tablet in her other hand, and she looked exactly as she had looked every time Mara had seen her. Composed, economical, carrying her own gravity without requiring anyone else to acknowledge it. Clean run, she said. That was it. 2 words. The words of a woman who spent them carefully and meant them completely. Mara looked at her. The kid in locker 14. Dana didn't move. What about it? How long ago? Something shifted in Dana's eyes, not pain, not the sharp thing that recent wounds make. The flatter, more settled quality of something that has been lived with long enough to become part of the landscape. 8 years, Dana said. Cycle 1. She looked at the training field for a moment, at the building that had been the adversarial capture scenario, at the chalk marks, in the equipment racks, in the concrete that had absorbed years of people doing difficult things in preparation for other difficult things. I passed the second time when Calloway wasn't running the evaluation. Mara said nothing. It doesn't fix it. Dana said this without self-pity and without bitterness, with the clean precision of a woman stating a fact about the limits of outcomes. What happens to him doesn't fix what the first time cost. No, Mara said, it doesn't. They stood together for a moment in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The silence of 2 people who understand the same thing from different distances. Then Dana shifted the gear bag on her shoulder. Return the kit when you're done. She walked toward the equipment bay. Someone else will need it. She did not look back. Mara watched her go and thought about the word paved. She had used it herself 3 days ago, walking past Dana in the corridor, and Dana had not responded to it then. But she had heard it. Mara knew she had heard it because Dana Reyes was a woman who heard everything and chose, with great deliberation, what to acknowledge. The afternoon moved through its hours. Evaluations completed, scores posted. The aggregate numbers produced by the independent system were not, to anyone who had been watching, a surprise. They were simply, at last, the truth on a page where only the truth was supposed to be. She was in the gear bay at 16:30, packing her kit, when she heard someone stop behind her. She recognized the step before she turned, not Hargrove. Heavier, more deliberate, the step of a larger man who has learned over many years to move quietly. "Captain," she turned. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Decker, 18 years in Naval Special Warfare, silver in his beard, 8 deployments behind his eyes. A man she had not spoken to in the full 9 days at Little Creek, because he had not spoken to anyone who didn't need to be spoken to. A man who assigned words the value they deserved and did not produce them below that threshold. He looked at her for a moment with the direct assessment of someone who has been watching for a long time and has arrived at a conclusion. "Moved like Force Recon the whole time," he said. "Clean, efficient, no wasted motion." A pause. "From us, that's a compliment." She met his eyes. "Noted." He looked at her for one more second. Then he turned and walked back to the far end of the gear bay and resumed what he had been doing as if the interruption had not occurred. She turned back to her kit. Around her, in the gear bay, other operators moved through their end-of-day routines. A few of them shifted slightly when she moved between the locker rows. Not the exaggerated step aside of deference, and not the subtle crowding of territory. Just space. The kind of space that comes not from instruction, but from the gradual collective revision of an understanding. She had not earned this space today. She had been earning it for 9 days every day, without knowing for certain whether it would amount to anything. This was the nature of the kind of work she had been doing. You built the record, you ran the drills, you held the line, and then you waited for the accumulation to become undeniable, which it either did or didn't, and you had very limited control over the timing. It had. She found herself, for the first time in 9 days, thinking about Quantico with something other than the sensation of a door she was keeping closed. The biometric intelligence assignment, the desk work with downstream consequences she could measure. She thought about what it would mean to do that work now, from this side of these 9 days, with the particular knowledge that came from having been precisely here and having done precisely this. She thought she would be good at it. She also thought it was not the only option. She closed the locker, picked up her bag. She was almost to the gear bay door when she noticed Calloway. He was standing at the far end of the room, near the equipment return window, holding his cover in both hands. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the equipment racks with the expression of a man who was in the middle of a long conversation with himself. The kind that had started the night before and had not yet found its end. She stopped. He did not look up, but something in his posture changed. The slight adjustment of a man who knows he has been seen and is deciding what to do about it. She walked toward him, not quickly, not slowly. She stopped at a distance that was close enough to be deliberate and far enough to give him the choice of whether to engage. He looked at her. She said nothing for a moment. Let the silence exist. There were things that could be said in this moment, about 9 days of false records, about a system that had been used against her, about the cost of a conviction that had been allowed to override the obligation to be accurate. She had the words for all of it. She also had, after 3 tours in 11 years and a very long 9 days at Little Creek, a reasonably precise understanding of which words would do something useful and which would only be satisfying, and the difference between those two categories mattered. She said, "You know what the program needed?" He looked at her, waiting. It needed someone to run it right, not someone to run it against. A long moment. He looked down at the cover in his hands. His jaw worked once. Then he looked back up. "That's a generous read," he said. "It's an accurate one." He held her eyes for a moment. Then he looked away. Not with deflection, but with the particular averted gaze of a man processing something he does not want to process in front of another person. "I was wrong about the method," he said. Quietly, the same words he had used in the review room, but without the room around them now. Just 2 people standing in a gear bay in the late afternoon, with the light going amber through the siding slats. "Yes," she said, "you were." She did not say anything else. She did not soften it or expand it or give him a path out of it, because the truth of it was the thing that mattered, and the truth of it was exactly what she had said, and he already knew it. She turned and walked to the door. She did not look back, but she heard him behind her do something she had not heard him do in 9 days. He set his cover on. Not the practice motion of a man performing the act for an audience. The simple, quiet action of a man who has finished standing in one place and is ready to move to the next. Hargrove's office was on the second floor, and the walk from the gear bay to the headquarters building took 4 minutes at her normal pace. The base had the quality it always had in the late afternoon. Activity winding toward its completion, the particular decompression of a place where the day's work has been done and the night's work has not yet begun. She knocked. "Come in." He was at his desk, not standing, not at the window, not in the performance of waiting for her. He was working, a legal pad with handwritten notes, a pen in his right hand. He looked up when she entered, but did not set the pen down immediately, finishing the thought he was completing before he gave her his full attention. He set the pen down. She sat, put the manila envelope on the desk between them. He had given it to her 4 days ago before the adversarial drill, in the same office, and she had not opened it because there had been work left to do before opening it was the right action. He looked at the envelope, then at her. "The evaluation board met this afternoon," he said. "Your aggregate score under the independent assessment protocol is 94.7. He paused. "Highest in the program's history." She said nothing. "The formal recommendation for combat lead liaison to my prototyping detachment has been submitted to NAV Spec Warcom." He folded his hands on the desk. "That's independent of anything you decide about Quantico. Both options are real." She looked at the envelope. "You needed 3 documented incidents with witnesses. You had them after day 7. Soto's statement gave you the 3rd. Yes. You moved on day 9. Yes. Why not day 8? He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to give Calloway the night." She looked at him. "He pulled the automated scores himself," Hargrove said. "On day 7 evening, after the adversarial drill. I know this because the system logs access." He sat with those numbers for 47 minutes. He paused. "A man who sits with evidence against himself for 47 minutes without destroying it is a man who is deciding something. I wanted to know which way he decided before I moved." She thought about Calloway in his dark office, the laptop screen, the gap between 91.4 and 63.8. "He wrote a statement," she said, "voluntary before the review. He submitted it at 4:27. Hargrove picked up the pen, set it down again. 26 years ago, I was a candidate in a program that tried to run me out for a reason that had nothing to do with my performance. The man who stopped it waited until he had everything he needed, and then he moved, and the case was complete." He looked at her. "Calloway and I came up in the same era. I've known what he was capable of for a long time, both kinds." This was the most he had said in any conversation about anything other than the operational requirements of the case he had been building. She understood it for what it was. Not a justification, not a confession, but the context that made the patience make sense. The patience of a man who had been precisely where she had been and who had built his career, in part, around making sure that what had happened to him was something a person could fight. She picked up the envelope. She opened it. Inside was the formal assignment letter, the NAV Spec Warcom letterhead, the specific language of the combat lead liaison position, the reporting date, the location. She read it completely, set it back on the desk. She looked at the topographic map on the wall, the coastline she had not been able to identify on her first visit. She could place it now, the irregular configuration of the sound between the barrier islands, the way the contour lines compressed at the inlet. North Carolina coast, somewhere near the Cape Lookout complex. "The prototyping detachment," she said, "what does it actually do?" He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile she had seen on his face in 9 days. "It builds what comes next," he said. "When the current system produces enough failures, enough gaps, enough moments where the right person wasn't in the right place because the pipeline didn't have room for them, that's when someone has to design something better." He looked at the map. "That's what the detachment does. It designs the something better." She thought about CBCA, about a program that had been running for 6 cycles, generating useful data and false records in equal measure, trying to answer a question that its own evaluation process kept distorting. She thought about Adrienne Pace, who had walked off a training field 7 years ago, and whose absence had not been recorded anywhere in the CBCIA documentation as a loss. She thought about Dana Reyes, who had passed on her second attempt when Calloway wasn't running the evaluation, and who had left a kit in a locker with a strip of tape on it because she understood from the inside that the thing that had been done to her was still being done to others, and that the only response available to her within the system she worked inside was the quiet one. "Return when done. Someone else will need it." "I'll think about it," Mara said. Hargrove nodded. "Take the time you need." She stood, picked up her bag, left the envelope on the desk. At the door she stopped. She turned. "The note on my orders," she said. "When I read it, In the parking lot, first morning. She paused. I almost didn't come in. He looked at her. I sat in the car for 11 minutes, and she said, I was running the calculation. Whether the Quantico assignment was the better use of what I know how to do. Whether this was going to produce anything. She stopped, looked at the wall beside the door. Then I thought about a woman I had never met named Adrienne Pace, and I went in. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. She knows what happened here, he said. I made sure she was informed this morning. Mara nodded once. Then she walked out and pulled the door closed behind her. The base at the end of the day had a quality that was different from the base at any other hour. Something settled, the specific decompression of a place where the requirement had been met, at least for today, at least in the ways that were measurable. The kind of quiet that precedes preparation for the next thing. She walked to her car, the same rented Chevy Malibu, gray, 400 miles on it now instead of the none it had carried when she arrived. She put her bag in the trunk, sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. She took out the notebook, turned to page 32, read the 2 lines she had written after the review room. Then she turned the page, blank. She looked at it for a moment. She put the notebook in the glove compartment. The decision about the assignment could wait until morning. The call to Quantico could wait until morning. Everything that required a decision rather than an action could wait until she had slept, and the 11 days had settled into whatever shape they were going to take when they were no longer the present and had become the recent past. She started the engine. Her phone lit up on the passenger seat. She glanced at it. Unknown number, not DeVos, she had his number now, had added it after the first call. Not Quantico, not any number she had encountered in 11 days at Little Creek. She picked it up, looked at the number, set it back on the seat. She pulled out of the parking space, drove to the gate, passed through the checkpoint, the same young duty officer who had been there on the first morning, who did not recognize her this time any more than he had recognized her then, which was fine. Recognition was not the point. She drove to the gate exit, stopped at the light. The phone lit up again, the same number. She watched it ring. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. She waited. The voicemail notification appeared. The preview showed 11 seconds. She drove for a few minutes, pulled into the lot of a gas station on Shore Drive, where the November dark had come down fully, and the lights were yellow and unromantic in the way of ordinary places that do not know they are sitting in the middle of someone's story. She stopped the car. She played the voicemail. 11 seconds. A man's voice she did not recognize. 3 sentences. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after the message ended. Then she sat very still. The name the voice had said was not a name she had encountered in 11 days at Little Creek. It was not a name from DeVos's history, or from Hargrove's files, or from the CBCIA documentation going back to Cycle 1. It was a name she had last encountered in a classified operational brief from a period of her career that was not in her official service record. The voice had said, "We know about Phoenix, and we need someone who has been there." She turned the phone face down on the seat, looked at the gas station lights, at the ordinary dark around them, at the Chesapeake somewhere beyond the tree line, running wide and gray toward the sea. She thought about a topographic map on a wall in an office on the 2nd floor of a building at Little Creek, about coastlines and contour lines, and the places where the geometry of the land meets the geometry of the water in ways that require someone to have paid very close attention. She thought about the notebook in the glove compartment and the blank page at the end of it. She thought about what comes next when the thing you came to do is finished. She started the engine. She drove north on Shore Drive with the heater running and the phone on the seat and the notebook in the glove compartment, and 11 days behind her that were already, with every mile, becoming something that had happened rather than something that was happening. The distance that turns the present into the past is not measured in miles. It is measured in the moment you stop carrying it in both hands and allow it to shift into the single hand, the carrying hand, the hand that holds the things you have done so that the other hand stays free. She drove. Behind her, in a gear bay that was now dark and locked, a kit sat in locker 14 with a strip of tape on the shoulder strap. Behind her, in an office on the 2nd floor, a man she trusted was writing something on a legal pad. Behind her, in a dining facility that had closed an hour ago, a young petty officer named Soto was eating late, alone, having made a decision that would cost him something and having decided that the cost was worth paying. Behind her, all of it. Ahead of her, 11 seconds of voicemail and a blank page and a phone number she had not added to her contacts yet. She drove north. The Chesapeake moved beside her in the dark, running where it ran, carrying what it carried, indifferent and ancient and unchanged by the particular events of 11 days in November at a base on its western shore. She drove north, and the road was long, and her hands were steady on the wheel. 31 pages. That's all it took to bring down a system that had been running for 6 cycles and destroying careers for 7 years. No lawyer, no formal complaint, Just a woman with a notebook and the discipline to write down every single thing they did to her, accurately, completely, without emotion. I've told a lot of stories on this channel. This one stayed with me. Because Mara never asked anyone to believe her, she just made it impossible not to. If that hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment below. And if you want more stories like this, the subscribe button is right there. I read every comment, every one.